There's a question almost every child asks. It usually comes without warning, maybe in the car, maybe at bedtime, right after you've told them that God made the stars, God made the oceans, God made every person who has ever lived. And then, with the merciless logic that only a 5-year-old can produce, they look up at you and ask,
Okay, so who made God?
most parents laugh or change the subject or say something like,
Nobody made God, sweetheart. He's just always been there.
and the child moves on to the next question about why the sky is blue. But for a lot of us, that question never really leaves. It goes quiet for a while. And then one day, maybe lying awake at 2 in the morning, maybe in a philosophy lecture, maybe scrolling through a debate online, it comes back. Except this time it doesn't sound like a child's curiosity anymore. It sounds like a trapdoor opening underneath everything you believe. If everything has a creator, then who created the creator? And if nothing created him, why does he get a free pass that nothing else in the universe gets? This is not a small question. It's one of the oldest questions human beings have ever asked, and it has quietly pulled people away from faith for centuries, not through some dramatic crisis, but through this one nagging thought that just won't sit still. And here's something remarkable. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warned us about this exact question 1400 years ago. He didn't just warn that people would ask it. He told us, almost word for word, how it would be asked and who would be whispering it. To really understand why this question feels so disorienting, we have to go back, long before the Quran was revealed, to the earliest writings human beings believed came from God. Long before Islam, there were revealed books, and if you sit down and read the Old Testament, the very first sentence of the book of Genesis doesn't try to explain where God came from. It simply says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." That's it. The universe gets a beginning. God does not. A few books over, in the book of Isaiah, there's a line where God says, "I am the first and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God." Again, no origin story, no explanation of where he came from. Just an assertion, stated as though it were the most obvious fact in existence, that this being simply has no before. So even in scriptures that over centuries were copied, translated, and in many places altered by human hands, this one idea survived almost untouched. God is eternal, without a starting point. What didn't survive untouched, unfortunately, was everything else. Because somewhere along the way, something strange started happening to how God was described. He started getting a personality, a temper, a body, a need for rest. We'll come back to that, because it matters. But first, let's deal with the actual question, the one your 5-year-old self asked, the one that still echoes in the back of a lot of adult minds. Where did God come from? Here's the strange thing. The problem isn't with God. The problem is hiding inside the question itself, in its grammar, in the assumptions baked into the words where and before and came from. Think about what those words actually mean. Where is a question about location, about space. Before and came from are questions about sequence, about time. Every origin question we've ever asked about anything is really just a question wrapped in time and space. Where were you born? When did this start? What existed before the universe? Now here's what modern physics has spent the last century figuring out, almost as an afterthought. Time and space are not the stage the universe sits on. They are part of the universe. Einstein's theory of relativity describes space-time as something that came into existence, something that began. Before the Big Bang, there was no before, not because nobody was keeping track, but because the very fabric that makes before and after possible didn't exist yet. Time itself switched on. This is a genuinely strange thing for the human mind to sit with, because we cannot think outside of time. Try it right now. Try to imagine nothing, truly nothing, not even time passing. You can't. Your brain will always sneak in a before and an after because that's the only operating system it has. And yet centuries before any of this was confirmed by physics, one of the most respected scholars in Islamic history had already laid it out in writing. Ibn Kathir, in his monumental historical work Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, The Beginning and the End, opens with the account of creation, and the very first thing he describes isn't the sun or the stars or the earth. It's the pen and the throne. Before anything else, before the heavens, before the earth, Allah created the pen and commanded it to write. Then came everything else, the heavens, the earth, and with them, the entire system we call time, morning and evening, before and after, cause and effect, all of it created. So now ask yourself the question again, but slowly this time. If time itself is something that was created, then the one who created it, can he be inside it? Think of an architect, a brilliant one. She designs a house from nothing, draws up the blueprints, decides where every wall, every window, every doorway will go. Does the architect live inside that house while she's designing it? Is she bound by its walls before they even exist? Of course not. The house's rules, its rooms, its boundaries only apply once the house exists. The architect stands completely outside the system she's creating. Where and before are words that only make sense inside the house. Asking where the architect was before the house existed isn't a deep question. It's a question that doesn't actually connect to anything, like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question sounds grammatically fine. It just doesn't point to anything real because you've run out of the system that gave the word north its meaning in the first place. That is exactly the situation we're in when we ask where Allah came from and what was before him. We're using words that only have meaning inside time and space, aimed at the one who built time and space. He's not inside the house. He's not bound by the blueprint. He is, in the most literal sense possible, beyond the entire question. And this is exactly why, when the Quran wants to describe Allah in the most complete, most concentrated way possible, it does it in one of the shortest chapters in the entire book, Surah Al-Ikhlas, 4 short verses, and one of them says it plainly, He neither begets nor was he begotten. Read that again, slowly. He neither begets, nothing comes out of him the way a child comes from a parent or an effect comes from a cause. Nor was he begotten. He didn't come out of anything else either. Both directions are sealed off. No origin behind him, and no spin-off coming from him the way creation comes from a creator. This single verse quietly dismantles centuries of human confusion about the nature of God because it's telling us that the very concepts of birth, origin, and coming from somewhere are properties of created things. They belong to the world of cause and effect. Allah simply does not belong to that world. He's not a very old created thing. He's not the oldest link in the chain. He's not part of the chain at all. Here's a way to feel this in your gut, not just understand it in your head. Try to picture a square circle. Not draw it, actually picture it in your mind, the way you'd picture an apple or a chair. You can't. Not because your imagination is weak, but because the words square and circle cancel each other out the moment you put them together. A circle, by definition, has no corners. A square, by definition, has nothing but corners. Square circle isn't describing a rare shape hidden somewhere in the universe. It's describing nothing at all, 2 words that destroy each other on contact. A created creator works the same way. Creator means the source, the one nothing else produced. Created means produced by something else. Put them together and you get a contradiction that erases itself, not a mystery waiting to be solved. If something was created, it's not the creator. It's just another creation, and the real question simply moves one step back. This connects to something philosophers call infinite regress, and you don't need a philosophy degree to feel why it's a problem. Imagine you're standing in an enormous crowd and everyone is being pushed forward by the person directly behind them. You ask the person behind you why they're moving, and they say, "Because the person behind me pushed me." You ask that person, and they say the same thing, and the person behind them, and the person behind them. Now imagine this line goes back forever. Not 1,000 people, not 1,000,000, forever, with no first person, no one who started moving on their own. Would the crowd ever move? It wouldn't, because forever, with nothing at the start, isn't a cause. It's the absence of one. For there to be any movement at all, somewhere in that line, there has to be a person who isn't being pushed. Someone who simply starts walking on their own power and sets everyone else in motion. The universe works the same way. Every event was caused by something before it. But if you trace that chain backward forever, with no actual starting point, then nothing in the chain would ever have happened. We wouldn't be here to ask the question. So the chain has to start somewhere, with someone who isn't part of the chain, who wasn't pushed by anything behind him, who simply is, and who set everything else into motion. This is where two of Allah's names come in that don't get talked about enough. Al-Awwal, the first, the one before whom there is nothing, and Al-Akhir, the last, the one after whom there is nothing. Not first in a sequence, the way a king is first before a second king comes along. First as in outside the sequence altogether, the reason the sequence exists at all. There's a moment in the history of the prophets, recorded in the Quran and elaborated in works like Qasas al-Anbiya, the stories of the prophets, where this exact argument was made thousands of years before Ibn Kathir, thousands of years before Einstein, by a young man standing in front of one of the most powerful kings on earth. His name was Ibrahim, and the king's name was Nimrod. Picture the scene. Nimrod ruled with the kind of absolute power that makes people start believing their own legends. He had come to believe he wasn't just a king, but something closer to a god. Subjects didn't just obey him, they were terrified of him, which in his mind amounted to the same thing as worship. And into this court walked a young man with no army, no political backing, nothing but a calm voice and an argument no one in that room had ever heard before. The exchange, as it's recorded, is almost shockingly simple, which is part of what makes it so powerful. Ibrahim, peace be upon him, said, "My Lord is the one who gives life and causes death." And Nimrod, confident, maybe even bored, answered,
"I too give life and cause death."
He wasn't bluffing either. To prove it, he had two prisoners brought before him. He ordered one of them, a man guilty of some crime, released. The other, an innocent man, he ordered killed on the spot. In Nimrod's mind, this settled it. He had taken a life and spared a life in front of everyone with a single word. There was probably a heavy pause after that. A king had just demonstrated his power in the most brutal way possible, and the room would have gone completely silent, the kind of silence where everyone is waiting to see what happens next, because everyone there knew that disagreeing with Nimrod tended to be fatal. And Ibrahim, peace be upon him, didn't argue with him about the prisoners at all. He didn't say, "That's not the same thing," or get pulled into a debate about justice. He shifted the entire conversation onto ground where Nimrod had no power whatsoever. He said, "My Lord causes the sun to rise from the east. Can you cause it to rise from the west?" That was it. No raised voice, no dramatic flourish. Just a simple, almost gentle question. And the Quran tells us what happened next in 3 words. The disbeliever was struck dumb. Nimrod said nothing, couldn't say anything, because in that single sentence, Ibrahim, peace be upon him, had exposed the entire fraud. Nimrod could order a death. He could order a pardon. He could make people bow and beg, but he could not move the sun 1 inch off its course. Despite the crown, the army, the terrified subjects, he was completely subject to the same laws as everyone else, bound by the same sunrise, the same sunset, the same flow of time as the lowest servant in his palace. That's the whole argument, distilled into a single image. A true creator cannot be bound by the system he created. The sun rises and sets according to a pattern that exists within time. Nimrod was inside that pattern, just like everyone else, just like the sun itself. He had no power over it because he was part of it. Real, ultimate authority has to come from outside the pattern altogether, from someone who set the sun on its course in the first place and who is not himself riding along on that same course. A creation can never operate on the level of its creator, and no quality of the creation can ever be projected backward onto the one who made it. This same confusion, trying to fit the creator into categories that only make sense for created things, shows up again, centuries later, in Mecca. According to the early biographical accounts of the Prophet's life, including Ar-Rahiq al-Maktoum, a group of people from the Quraysh came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with a question that sounds almost crude on the surface, but underneath it's the exact same question, just dressed in the language of 7th century Arabia. They asked him to describe the lineage of the God he was inviting them to worship. Tell us about his family. Is he made of gold, silver? Where does he come from? To them, this wasn't strange at all. Every idol they worshipped had an origin story, carved from this wood, brought from that town, made by this craftsman. Every powerful being they could imagine had a genealogy, a material, an origin point. So naturally, they assumed the God of Islam must have one too. And the response to that question is one of the most memorized chapters in the entire Quran. Say, He is Allah, the One, Allah, the self-sufficient Master, whom all creation depends upon, while He depends on nothing. He neither begets nor is begotten, and there is nothing comparable to Him. Notice what this does. It doesn't answer the question they asked. It rejects the question's premise entirely. They asked what He's made of and where He comes from, and the answer is, essentially, those questions don't apply. He is As-Samad, a word so dense in meaning that entire books have been written trying to unpack it, but at its core, it means the one who needs nothing and no one, while everything else, every atom, every star, every breath you've ever taken, needs Him to keep existing. A being like that doesn't have a made of, doesn't have a comes from. Those categories belong entirely to the world of things that depend on something else to exist, and As-Samad stands completely outside that world, not as the biggest thing inside it, but as the reason anything inside it exists at all. Now remember what we set aside earlier, that strange thing that started happening to descriptions of God in some of the earlier scriptures. Here's where it comes back, and here's why it matters. In the book of Genesis, after describing 6 days of creation, there's a line that says God rested on the 7th day. Just rested, the way you or I might collapse onto the couch after a long week. Think about what that sentence quietly implies. Rest is something you need when you're tired. Tiredness is something that happens to a body, operating within time, expending energy that eventually runs low and needs to recover. The moment you say, God rested, you've pulled God into the exact framework we've spent this whole discussion dismantling. You've given Him a body that gets tired, a process that takes time, a before and an after. Compare that to one of the most famous verses in the entire Quran, Ayat al-Kursi, the verse of the throne. It says, neither drowsiness nor sleep overtakes Him, not even drowsiness, not even the beginning of tiredness. Why? Because creating the heavens and the earth cost Him nothing. There was no exertion, no depletion, nothing to recover from, because His command is simply be, and it is. No machinery, no raw material, no labor, no time elapsed in the doing of it. It's not that early prophets taught that God gets tired. It's that over generations of retelling, copying, and reinterpreting, small human assumptions crept in. The same way a story changes slightly every time it's retold around a fire, until eventually someone tells a version where the fire itself becomes a character. In this view, the Quran isn't introducing a new God. It's stripping away every human fingerprint that had quietly accumulated on the description of the same eternal being that Genesis opened with, the one who created the heavens and the earth, and who, unlike the heavens and the earth, was never created himself. Here's where it gets personal, because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, didn't just leave us with philosophical arguments and historical comparisons. He gave us something far more practical, a warning about exactly how this question would show up in our own minds centuries after he was gone. In a hadith recorded in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that Shaitan will come to a person and start asking, "Who created this? Who created that?" Small questions at first. Who created the sky? Who created the mountains? Who created you? And then the Prophet said, Shaitan will keep going, question after question, each one technically reasonable on its own, each one following naturally from the last, until he reaches the final one. So who created your Lord? And here's the instruction the Prophet gave for that exact moment. Not sit down and figure out the answer. Not research this until you're satisfied. He said, when it reaches that point, seek refuge in Allah and stop. At first glance, that might sound like the Prophet was telling people to avoid a hard question, to just not think about it. But that's not what's happening. And once you understand why, this hadith becomes almost shockingly insightful. Shaitan's strategy here isn't really about getting you to find an answer. It's about getting you onto a treadmill, a sequence of questions that feels like it's building towards something, that feels like normal, healthy curiosity, but is actually engineered to walk you off the edge of a cliff that doesn't exist. Every question in that chain, who made the sky, who made the mountains, who made you, has a real sensible answer. And that's exactly what makes the final question feel like it should have one too. It feels like the next logical step, but it isn't a step at all. It's the square circle. It's the question built on a contradiction. The instruction to stop isn't intellectual surrender. It's recognizing a malfunction in the question itself, the same way you'd stop trying to find the value of dividing by zero. Not because you're scared of the answer, but because the operation itself doesn't produce one. Shaitan is betting you won't notice the switch, that you'll keep treating this question exactly like the ones before it, never realizing that somewhere along the way, the ground underneath the conversation quietly disappeared. There's one more piece to this, and it might be the most humbling one. Even after all of this, the logic, the verses, the history, there's still a kind of dissatisfaction some people feel. A sense of, okay, I understand why the question doesn't work, but I still can't fully picture an eternal being with no beginning. My mind just won't hold it. And here's the honest answer to that. It's not supposed to. Imagine an ant living inside the foundations of a massive skyscraper. That ant can learn an enormous amount about its immediate world, the texture of the concrete, the temperature of the pipes, the rhythm of footsteps overhead. But that ant will never comprehend the architect who designed the building, the decades of planning, the financial systems that funded it. Not because the ant is unintelligent for an ant, it's because the ant's entire mind was built for navigating tunnels and finding food, not for understanding architecture. Our minds are extraordinary. They can do calculus, write symphonies, send rockets to other planets. But every one of those achievements happens inside a framework of time, space, cause, and effect. Because that's the world our minds evolved to navigate, and the world this universe is made of. Asking our minds to fully visualize a being who exists outside that framework isn't a small ask. It's asking the ant to understand the architect. And honestly, if a human mind could fully wrap itself around the nature of God, comprehend him completely, with no remainder, no mystery left over, that alone would be evidence that this God was actually just a concept small enough to fit inside a human skull. The very fact that something about him remains beyond our full grasp isn't a flaw in the picture. It's almost a built-in sign that we're talking about something real and not something we invented. Which brings up a question that tends to follow naturally from everything we've covered. If all of this is true, if Allah's existence can be reasoned toward this clearly, why doesn't he just show himself? Why leave any room for the question at all? The Quran describes the believers right at the opening of Surah Al-Baqarah as those who believe in Al-Ghaib, the unseen. And that phrase is doing a lot of work. Think about what a final exam actually is. A teacher who wants to know whether a student has genuinely learned the material doesn't hand them the answer key during the test. That would defeat the purpose. The test only means anything because the answers aren't sitting right there in front of you. You have to draw on what you've learned and commit to an answer without someone holding your hand through every step. This life, in this worldview, is exactly that kind of test. Not a test of whether you can see God, but a test of what you do with everything else He's given you. The sky full of stars, moving with breathtaking precision, a body that heals itself, that converts food into thought, that lets you understand these very words, a conscience that more often than not knows the difference between right and wrong before you've even finished thinking about it. None of that is the answer key exactly, but it's more than enough for someone willing to think it through. If God appeared in a way that left absolutely zero room for doubt, belief would stop being a choice. It would just become an observed fact, like the boiling point of water. And the entire point of this life, the searching, the wrestling with doubt and coming out the other side, would disappear. So let's go back to where we started. A child looks up and asks, "Who made God?" And underneath that question, once you really pull it apart, there are actually two separate questions hiding, wearing the same disguise. Where did he come from is a question about space. What came before him is a question about time. And both space and time aren't the stage Allah performs on. They're part of the set, part of the creation, things He brought into being, the same way the pen and the throne were brought into being before anything else, the same way the sun was set on its course before Nimrod ever drew a breath. He has no where, because where didn't exist until He made it exist. He has no before, because before is a word that only started meaning anything once time itself began. Asking where Allah came from isn't a profound question that's gone unanswered for millennia. It's a question that was broken before it was ever asked, built from words that only function inside the very thing He created, aimed at the one who stands entirely outside it. There's a reason that 5 times a day, in prayer after prayer, the words Allahu Akbar get repeated in a rhythm so familiar it's easy to stop noticing what they actually mean. Allah is greater. Greater than what exactly? Greater than every comparison your mind can reach for. Greater than the categories of time, space, cause, beginning and end. Not just bigger within those categories, but entirely beyond their reach. Every time those words are said, in a sense, they're a quiet answer to the whisper that's been planted in human minds since before recorded history. This is not a being who needs an origin story. This is the one whose name comes first and last, and who needed nothing else to exist before any of this. The stars, the question, even the asking of it, ever began.
Share this video with someone who needs to hear that truth has many paths, but only one destination.